What's going on, Cylinder Radio listeners? If you're interested in the nuance of dialogue and things like that, check out my freebie, download, Debate to Dialogue, How to Have Productive Conversations About Politics and Religion. Hello and welcome to the next episode of Cylinder Radio. I am your host, Will Roosh, high school civics teacher in Los Angeles, trying to bring viewpoint diversity to the common dialogue that we're having as a nation. And one of the ways that I try to work through this is through media. And my guest today is Henry Brechter. He is the editor-in-chief of AllSides Media. It's an incredible organization that I'm going to go into, but basically the topic's going to be for today is media bias. What Henry and everyone at AllSides is doing is important, and I think it's something that a lot of people side with, but they don't really necessarily know about it. All they know about is CNN or Fox News or something like that, but I'm excited to kind of chop it up with you. Henry, thank you so much for giving your time. I really appreciate it, and let's get into this whole thing, but can you just give us a little bit of background into you kind of being like at the helm of this thing and what AllSides is?
Thank you, Will, for having me. I'm happy to be here. Always happy to talk about bias and these various issues that are plaguing our discourse and our society. So I'll start with what AllSides is. We are a media solutions company, and we seek to strengthen the democratic society with balanced news, media bias ratings, diverse perspectives, and civic engagement. So we serve news communities and news consumers with all different kinds of tools, whether it's our balanced news feed, our media bias chart, our types of media bias guide, as well as now we're actually getting into classrooms and trying to create lesson plans. And so far, we've made connections with schools in all 50 states. So we're off on the right foot there. That obviously lines up with what you're doing well as a teacher. But that's the elevator pitch sort of for AllSides. As far as what I do, I'm our editor-in-chief, so I oversee the daily news operation. If you go to allsides.com, you'll find a news feed of the top political and issue-based stories of the day in the U.S., presented with the left, the center, and the right's take in terms of news headlines, or sometimes we also present opinion headlines on various issues. So that's my day-to-day, overseeing that, as well as our social media accounts, newsletters, etc. So you can find out about all that more at allsides.com.
For sure. You know, what's interesting is when I came across your website, I had this element of like patting myself on the back, which I don't do very often, for about 6 years now or so, probably a little bit more than that. I think it was like a little bit before Trump got in office, where I started to see a lot of the culture war stuff. I started doing an assignment in my government and in my civics class, which is my students find a top news story of the last 6 months, and then they get, basically I just did 6 sources, so they have to do 6 sources from the left, 6 sources from the right, and then talk about what was highlighted, what was omitted. And where this came about was there was a Texas church shooting, and a guy went in with an AR-15 and shot up a church. Horrible situation. It was on his way out, and an NRA safety officer stopped, grabbed his AR-15 out of his truck, took aim, and took the guy out before he could kill anyone else. And it was so interesting. I was shocked because, the conservative media was talking about how this AR-15 stopped the shooter, and the NRA, safety officer stopped the shooter. And then more liberal media, left-wing media was talking about how the AR-15, killed these people in the church. And I was like, well, they're both true. And when I saw what you guys do, the way it's structured is so user-friendly. And I think in today, 2023, especially with young people and stuff, it's like, give it to me easy. Right. And you guys have such a user-friendly platform. That's why, I'm with you. Please go check it out because it's so easy to digest. You don't have to weed through a whole lot. You get right to the point.
That's the idea. And with that in mind, sort of the easy to digest, setting the foundation, right? The bias ratings that we present when we tell you that CNN is on the left, that Fox News is on the right, those are not meant as a gotcha, right? We're not like, that's bias. We found it. Bias is natural. Everyone is biased. You and I are biased, Will, but so are every journalist that works in U.S. media. It's a natural human condition. The issue is when journalists especially act like they're immune to bias, or act like, they've been conditioned as a reporter now where, bias is not a concern. They know how to do it. And really, when we get to that point, journalists start missing things. Audiences start being misled, pushed into their corners, and then we get this vicious cycle of media. The key always lies in getting different perspectives, whether you're looking for the truth, just looking for a balanced range of opinions. The key is getting a diverse set of perspectives. And yes, like you said, we try to make that as easy to consume as possible, because it can seem like a lot, especially with the billions of competitor links that we have out there in the internet, right?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the situation. As you go back in the day, a couple of generations, and you had 3 news channels, so they kind of aim for the middle. I'm sure you read Matt Taibbi's Hate Inc.
Yeah.
Great book, just about how Fox News kind of had this idea, and then they're like, oh, well, let's lean into this and hit our base, and it kind of just became the model. What's your background, Henry? Did you have a journalism background?
I got a degree in journalism from the University of Massachusetts in 2019, joined AllSides right after that. So I've been here about 4 years now, leading the news operation essentially since I started here.
Wow.
I actually started out as a sports reporter covering high school football, college football here in Massachusetts where I live. Then out of just sort of dumb luck, found AllSides through a journalism fellowship I was doing post-grad, got linked up, got hooked on the idea of the need for balance, because I went through 4 years of journalism school. I had no real understanding of how bias takes shape in the media and can create narratives and reinforce polarization. We did not cover that.
How is that possible? That seems like, because I'm such an outsider, how is that possible? Because it seems like to me, that's the biggest issue.
I think especially with journalists, and I'm allowed to criticize them because I am one, but typically we are very stubborn and confident in our beliefs. We try to be smart and well educated on whatever the issue is that we're covering, but the smartest, the most stubborn people we've seen in studies are also the most likely to sort of be extreme in their beliefs or want to tune out the other side because they know they're right. And so I think journalists and educators too, unfortunately, can fall into this sort of thought bubble as well, where have 15, 20 journalists who all came from legacy establishment media companies now running this journalism program at whatever college. They all think about things the same way. And the result you have is their student body only getting sort of one side of the education. And that was not just at my school. You know, we've brought in people to AllSides who experienced a similar thing coming up in their journalism school. And really, again, that's just bias taking shape, and journalists not doing enough to be aware of it and sort of set the next generation up to be able to counteract it, see it in their own work. It's not emphasized nearly enough in journalism education right now.
What was the take? Very curious, because are you like a punk rock guy? Like, why would you not aim to go mainstream? Why do you not want to write at the Journal or the Times or something like that? I mean, maybe you did. Was it like you did and it was just there's too many gates to get in there? Like, I tried to get a mainstream teaching job and I had to get into a charter school, which turned out to be the greatest thing. Like, is it one of those? Because you seem like you are in an awesome position when it comes to the trends that are going, but there is still something that's appealing to that. Barry Weiss talked about it in her exit letter from the New York Times. Like, that's something that your mom could be like, my son works at the Times. You know what I mean?
Right. And when, you know, I interned and worked at the Boston Globe for 2 years, and I was sort of in that mindset when I got there. Wow, I'm at the Boston Globe. Oh my God, how cool is this? And I was just covering sports. I wasn't even doing politics or issues. But then I get out now years later, you know, the Globe has its own problems with ownership and sort of that whole structure, as well as just an imbalance of perspectives, I think, on their editorial team. But those were just things I was not hip to. What I was aware of, I think, early on in my own career was that I didn't want to just be a cog in a wheel, and I could easily see the direction that journalism was going. Whether or not I knew about bias, I knew that for whatever reason, the current model was not working, and newspapers were failing, and TV stations and local radio stations were laying people off left and right. And I just knew I should probably try to do something different. So I did have a few options. I could have gone into print, traditional newspaper. I could have gone into TV production and worked at an NBC affiliate up in Portland, or I could have worked for a digital media startup and tried to make my own way. And I'm glad I picked that because it ended up being the right decision for a lot of different reasons. But really, I just knew that to have the most impact that I wanted to have in my career and achieving that goal of really bringing the information to the people, that my potential of having the greatest impact most quickly was outside of the establishment, outside of the system, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, it's awesome. You brought up ownership. So there's an issue, like when Elon bought Twitter, there's a lot of media outrage. If I'm just talking more like, left-wing media, I suppose, but I didn't see that as much when Jeff Bezos bought the Washington Post.
Sure.
The ownership, if Bezos owns the Washington Post, is there going to be a little bit of a slant to not talk about how, Amazon treats its employees or how Whole Foods has some poison lettuce or something like that? Probably, corporate sponsors, you probably saw that clip of Anderson Cooper brought to you by Pfizer, blah, 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 brought to you by Pfizer.
Right.
It's not tinfoil hattish to go, this is who's paying my bills. I can't talk trash through the lens of news on this because that's my livelihood. That's a really tough situation. So what are your thoughts on that? And then how do you guys get around that?
So I think with the Washington Post thing, the Washington Post can publish some great investigative work on how Amazon treats its employees. And I believe that they have, actually, since Bezos took over. I Don't quote me on that, but they've definitely done some investigative reporting on Amazon since Bezos has owned the paper. The question is, how much more could they be doing? How much are they not doing? If I was to hand a Washington Post reporter the juiciest story about Jeff Bezos and how he was doing something crazy illegal or whatever it was, I'm not saying that's true, just hypothetical.
Yeah.
Would they run it? I don't know.
I mean, it just might be like a bad career move. Like, even if you do, it's just like, why would you just voluntarily piss off your boss when there's a million examples of injustice in the world? Why focus on the one that's your boss? Like, it's just not a wise decision.
Right. And again, it's sort of common sense for the average reader to suspect that might be the case. So it's perfectly fair. I do think journalists, are having a crisis here because obviously, the checks need to be signed and business needs to get done. And we cite it too. We could publish headlines all day about COVID theories and the LGBTQ culture wars that are happening currently and get way more clicks and engagement than we currently do, right? But we're not going to do that because balance is part of the mission. And we're adhering to the mission first and the bottom line later. And frankly, at this point, is our content side as profitable as it could be if we covered all those things primarily? No, it's not. But that's the sacrifice we're making in the name of admitting that the current media model is not going to work and is just going to polarize people further. And we need to sort of shift and get the pendulum swinging back the other way. With our ownership, we're owned, we're privately owned. Our CEO, John Gable, is also a co-founder and has just privately owned the company with very little outside funding and still no paid advertising or anything like that. Yeah. So that sets us up for, some agility when it comes to that private ownership structure, but also opens us up to, people can easily look up and see that John back in the 80s worked as a Republican political operative. So right then and there, people could say, well, look at this ownership, but even back to the Bezos example. Bezos can own that paper, and if it is in his ideology, can allow the expose sort of reporting if he so chooses. The content does not always line up with the ownership. That's why you have to go past just who owns what, who's funding what. That's a start, but it really lies in the content and what's being reported or what's not being reported. And so if you can go find much better investigative reporting on Amazon in a different paper, then it's definitely fair to wonder, what is WAPO doing or not doing, right? But until you've actually read across the spectrum and tried to get as many different perspectives that are out there, I would advise against people just seeing, oh, this person owns this paper, they must be biased this way, right? Because it's never as simple as that.
That's a great point. Thank you for kind of clearing it up for me. Because I, as like a rube in this area, I'm just like, oh, well, I'll just make an assumption that he's going to do this. But that would be so obvious if the Times then runs this whole story and they dropped it. That looks bad for the newspaper, and he's in this to, he's a capitalist. I mean, speaking of capitalism is the way I explain it to my class, and I don't know if this is accurate. Maybe you can help me with this. Like I said, the phone case that you have is because it's the phone case you want. The shoes that you have is the shoes that you want. But when you apply that model, the capitalist model of like the markets of buying what you want for the price that you want, when you apply that to news and media, then you automatically are going to go to the news and media that you want. And that is not the news and media that you need, because the news and media that you want is the one that tells you that you're right and you're great and your people are great and your side is great. And because that's what makes you feel good. But that's not necessarily what you need to hear. And as a teacher, part of it, and even I have kids, is like, I got to do things that you don't want to hear or you don't want to know, but you need to. I worry about that. I think it was Brett Weinstein was saying something like, markets are great at doing things, but terrible at figuring out what to do. And I wonder if media and news is one of those areas that when you apply a capitalistic model, it doesn't work out. What are your thoughts on that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think, again, it's something else that journalists are struggling with. I remember a few years ago at an event, I asked this question of audience engagement reporter or editor for a big newspaper. And I asked her, how does the newsroom balance what the audience wants and is calling for through engagement with what they need? And her response was, well, I think that question assumes that those two things are different. And I held my tongue, but I was like, and that sort of illustrated to me how journalists, because they know they need to stay in business, are sort of justifying these things in their own minds, that we are the authority on what people need to know, and based on what we're seeing that people want to see, that's how we sort of figure out what people need to know. That is not the way to do it. That's part of it. Obviously, what the perspectives people are calling for and want to see addressed should be addressed in journalism, but it's the eat your peas problem, right? Like,
yeah, it's a great way to put it.
You get the brisket and you get the great mashed potatoes, but you got to eat the peas too. That's an age-old dilemma for journalists, and one that's especially prudent right now because we desperately need to figure out how to get people to trust us again and how to get people to just see past the, yes, there is bias, but it doesn't stop at that. It's not as simple as that. You can't just use that as a reason to tune out civically, because that's always going to be there. At that point, it's on you to go past that, go past the headlines, go past just the monotony of the bias and the big headlines.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, like, how do you do this? Like, you guys are in a situation where you are more of like an aggregate. So you would just have to identify and then bring it in and then share it, like in between. So that takes that. What you have to do then is just be aware of the things of what's going on. So how do you get your team to understand bias? Like, one of the things that John Haidt's moral foundations theory has helped me a lot with that, understanding the left and the right, like his book Righteous Mind. It was really good for me to understand like why people could see morality so differently than me. Like, do you guys go through a program for your team to be like, here's how you identify bias and things like that? Like, how do you do that?
Yeah, so it's part of that. It's definitely sort of a conditioning, especially when people are hired, but also early on, just getting them to notice bias, be more aware of it, whether it's in their own writing or reviewing other people on the team's writing for bias, as well as, third-party bias in other media companies that we review and rate. But part of it is just getting used to writing about it. The news team, what we do when we do our 3-way headline roundups that you see on the homepage, we also write a 250 word summary to go along with it, explaining a bit of the nuances about how the media covered it similarly or differently and whatever the key facts were, right? To write that effectively in only 200 words, you need to be very good at capturing the key points, presenting the different sides in a sort of nonpartisan way. And that does not come naturally to most people, especially I find that people who actually haven't been trained as journalists sometimes are better at coming in and doing that right away, because journalists have been taught to write a certain way and maybe elevate or focus on a certain community or perspective more. But it lies in practice makes perfect and repetition, right? And I think the key, again, for our news team, just like we try to advocate it for our readers, you need to get multiple perspectives. We have our balanced search tool, which the news team uses a lot. If you search the news of the day, you'll see Google search results sorted by left, center, and right. And so right away, that goes past our just manual 3-way comparison, and you can instantly see hundreds of results across the spectrum on a different story. So the news team uses that a lot to quickly gauge from a bird's eye view what the mood points are on different sides of the spectrum, and then go forth to reflect the coverage in the way that we can see. We try to make it as comprehensive as possible. There's likely always something that we're leaving out, just like there is in every other article that you'll read, right? But as comprehensive as we can possibly be in 250 words, that's what we're going to try to do.
What a challenge. The way I talk to my class, I ask kids, I'm like, who here is good in English class? It goes right there. I said, like, what makes you a good writer according to your English teacher? And it's like, it's diction, it's word choice, it's descriptive language, it's stuff. My 6-year-old, his books are great. They're not biased at all. It's like the dog sat. It's like so like, but it's like, that's not good writing. What makes a good writer? The kind of person that your English teacher says you should be a writer. Well, if you want to be a writer, you only have so many options. It's that kind of stuff. And I was like, even if you say I don't want to be biased, I say, like, I give an example. I say, like, this sentence. I write a sentence out. I say, like, Cindy is, and I have a blank, and it says, like, skinny, gaunt, emaciated, thin. Like, it depends on which one it is, and you're just trying to use cool words. But that's going to steer your reader down a certain path to go, like, Cindy's needs a sandwich, or Cindy's looking great. And that just those little tweaks in 250 words, like one word changed will get people to go, like, oh, Trump's bad or Trump's good or whatever it is. Or this person's a Trumper, or this person's, a wokey or whatever that kind of stuff is. It's so tricky.
And it's like, if we think about what makes a good writer, one of the first words that comes in my mind is convincing, right? They have a way of being persuasive. In that regard, being a good writer is much different than being a good journalist, because as a journalist, you're not trying to convince the reader of anything other than what they're reading is important. You're not trying to convince them of a certain point of view. You're not trying to tell them how to feel. You're trying to help them think for themselves and decide for themselves based on the available information. So when we talk about being a good journalist, it's doing that while also being, exciting without being sensational and still, being balanced and balancing all those out. And that's why I'm a big fan of word counts, and word maximums. One, for making it easy on the reader and simple. Two, for just, maintaining bandwidth, especially at a startup. But three, it forces you as a writer to really focus on what's the meat, what are the essential things, and strip out any unnecessary words, whether it's, subjective analysis and little subtle adjectives that can really have a big impact on the reader's perception, or just maybe that extra argument you included from that side that creates an imbalance in the piece, right? Yeah, it's different in different cases, but again, the key part of being a good journalist, at least in our sense, is convincing the reader that what they're reading is important and that they're going to get something out of it, right? And that driving home that point that the multiple perspectives on this issue, whatever issue you care about, is key.
Few people probably watch legacy media as closely as you do. So how do you see the changes, even just in the past couple of years, of like legacy media? Is it dying? Because I think I look back at the printing press and that was a really big change. Now you print this out, and I guess apparently it led to a lot of witch hunts, so fake news. But the internet is like the printing press times a million. And I wonder if that's just exposing a lot of things that we're seeing with CNN and Fox News, of what they're really doing and who's in whose pocket and all that kind of stuff. Have you seen a change in the way legacy media, where they've kind of lost their integrity a little bit? And do you think it's dying, or what do you think is the future? I know there's a lot there, but
I think the mission or a lot of the fundamentals have died. But as far as the business is very much alive, unfortunately for the wrong reasons at this point. It's the wrong behaviors that are funding the media business, I think, overall in general, right? Because it's a lot of clickbait, it's a lot of sensationalism, it's a lot of bias by story choice, right? Only focusing on these perspectives, these communities, ignoring the issues that aren't important to what a news company believes its core audience, its core money makers are, right? And so in that regard, the media is dead. At the same time, the rich continue to get rich. The $787 million that Fox spent sounds like a huge crooked number, but Fox is still going to be on TV tonight and tomorrow and probably for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, they have $4 billion in cash assets, I heard. So
right. So you can't, it's definitely not dead in that regard, but it is interesting to see how media shifts with the times. Even just looking at CNN, we had CNN rated as lean left for a long time. And then once up and through the end of Trump's presidency and the start of the Biden presidency, and we saw such a sharp contrast in the coverage from CNN of the two presidents that it sort of pushed CNN to the left instead of lean left. Now, with up until maybe at least recently, I guess, with Trump coming back in the news. But then as things died down, as the news landscape shifted away from just, at least how the media presented it, Trump's daily attacks on whatever, then we saw the more partisanship sort of fade out of the media a little bit. And now CNN is back in the lean left column. So the news outlets shift around a lot with the times. I do think another thing we've noticed is, and again with CNN made some leadership changes last year, and it was sort of out there that they were making a conceded effort to be more balanced, be nonpartisan. Well, months later now, there's another sort of internal reckoning at CNN with whether or not that's worked at all and whether or not that's the right way to go. Yes, media are responding to the lack of trust and people just having this crisis of bias and misinformation and not knowing where to go for media. They're responding to it in various ways, whether it's leadership changes or just leaning more into sensationalism, or some companies, on a positive note, are actually working with us now to pay us to help them become more neutral, more balanced. So we're working directly with their newsrooms.
Oh, awesome.
Studying their news content in detail, surveying their audiences to see what their audience thinks of their content and how it might lean. And the companies that we've worked with so far have been extremely responsive, engaged with us. We've been allowed to make direct contact with their newsrooms and do presentations and go over standards and really have an impact on the journalism they're doing and making it more balanced. And so on a positive note, we're starting to see that level of media responsiveness to trust crisis. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that was really, Joe Rogan is such a big platform. It's like the biggest media platform now in the country or something like that, which is wild.
Right.
when he had COVID, that was something where it's so obvious, and his platform's so much bigger than CNN. So it was a really tough thing because they like changed the filter, they changed the way he looked. They talked about how he was taking horse tranquilizer when, I mean, who knows about ivermectin? I don't even know if I should say it. Like, I'm not saying it's going to do anything, but it's clearly not just a veterinary medicine. Like, they're lying. And when that happens, and then you have someone like Joe Rogan who's doing 3 hours every single day talking about it, it makes you look bad. I'm sure that affects them, and it breaks trust for like, what's their agenda? Why are they doing this? Why are they pushing this kind of stuff? Like, you have a couple of big names, you know, Elon Musk, Joe Rogan, whoever they are, calling this up. Matt Taibbi, you know, calling out these big legacy media companies. It gets people's attention to start looking at them a little closer, right?
Yeah, it does. And that needs to continue. That scrutiny needs to continue, and dialogue needs to continue, because at this point, we still have too many people in leadership positions in journalism that aren't willing to hear the other side, that aren't really willing to hear criticism of journalism fundamentals. This is the way we do things. And I think that's why it goes back to the importance of what you're doing with your classroom, what we're trying to do with schools, is really coach the next generation of decision makers on understanding the importance of viewpoint diversity, understanding that criticisms, however crazy they might sound, you should at least listen, right? Rather than tuning them out. Whether that's debate class or courses on critical thinking, just coaching young people to get more in that mindset and sort of get us on the right track to now in 20 years, it'll be much easier, and there'll be much more of this responsive relationship, I think, and media trust will be healthier because we have more people that are hip to the issues and how easily media outlets can fall out of trust, and how easy it is for readers to just write you off and assume that you don't care about them at all, when that might not be the case. But if we're not making an effort to connect with people, and yes, understand what they want, also understand that we still need to give them what they need, and walk in that line, is always going to be a challenge, but we can't run from it. Yeah, a lot of people are trying to.
Yeah, they got to eat their peas. Yeah, I mean, people say they want the truth, but it's that you don't. I mean, a lot of times you don't like hearing criticisms about yourself. And like, it's what you need. How have you been received? Like, how are you if you go to like a I don't know, some sort of banquet dinner? I don't know what you guys do. Like, are you, because you're not on one side or the other. I mean, you're not. I mean, that's the kind of I mean, even if you personally are, or people personally are, I'm sure people have their own convictions at the company, of course. If the mission is to try and, you know, understand freaking name, you know what I mean? Like, are you kind of seen as like not one of the bad guys, or are you seen as a bad guy because you're trying to disrupt their echo chamber kind of status quo?
We've seen it from both sides, I think. And it really, who is the decision maker at that company, and what's their personal stance? Are they open to this or not? And when they haven't been, it hasn't ended well. And, you know, I think going back to a point I've made a couple times is basically a lot of current media are very convinced of the way that they're doing things. And they're convinced that, no, we are the authority. We know how to present issues a certain way. We are the final word. That is not the way. That is not journalism fundamentals, is being the final word. Being the final word on sort of a credible source of information, not being the final word on how people should feel and what the narrative should be. Journalism isn't supposed to drive narrative. It's supposed to provide access to information. It's much different. And journalists blend those lines now to the point where some are pretty opposed to us and don't particularly like us. And we've had that sort of response at huge media companies and from big journalism think tanks. But at the same time, we've also had influential people at some of the similar companies really like us and talk to us. So we have great relationships at some big companies and burn bridges at others maybe. But I think we're trying to set the dominoes up to create this chain reaction, especially with schools, and try to maintain our younger user base for getting our mission to be the norm, to be the status quo.
Well, you guys have an awesome presence on social media. I use Instagram a lot, and that's like my platform for like expanding my classroom. And your Instagram's great because it's very easy. It's right to the point. I think it's fair. That's a great one. I think that, you know, I saw some statistic about, and it lines up. I asked my students, like, what percentage of people get their news from TikTok, and it's horrifying. But, you know, I'm sure you guys have a TikTok, so like, if that,
we're just starting it right now.
Yeah, I think you need it, because if they're going to be getting the news from there, let's get them from you so they can at least see what's going on.
Right. You know? That's a core part of the dilemma we're having, specifically around misinformation, right? Is like, do we act like misinformation, you know, when we know about it? Do we just ignore it so it goes away? No, that's not our solution. Call it out, put it in context. The truth reveals itself in multiple perspectives, right? So if you have the misinformation. You can put it alongside the 10 articles that call it misinformation, and it's much easier to see for the reader, not only this is BS, but this is why it's BS. Don't ignore it. The best cure for that BS is always sunlight, is always exposure in our mind, being open about it. It's going to fester out there one way or the other. It's better if you call it out. Just like what's going on in TikTok, to draw that parallel. There's a ton of BS on TikTok. It's better for us to get there, get in, and sort of try to stake out a niche and have an influence instead of just write the platform and its users off, which I think some companies do. We're finally turning that corner and getting into TikTok right as the U.S. government moves to ban it. So we'll see how that goes.
See if that goes through. Yeah, I don't. Well, the whole process of it's not just banning TikTok, right? That's a complex thing. They're trying to get a lot of control over media, which seems.
Yeah.
How do you deal with mistakes? Here's the reason why I ask. I used to use Snopes, and I was like, this is the fact checking website. And then a meme came out that said something along the lines of Trump voted to clean up America's oceans, but you won't hear anything about that on mainstream news. So I went to Snopes and I was like, okay, that doesn't seem like Trump. He seems like someone who would want to dump toxic waste into the ocean, not take it out. So I went into Snopes and I looked at it and it said false. I was like, I knew it. I knew he's not cleaning up the oceans. And, most people just read the headline. But then I was like, you know what? Let me actually look beyond the false. And what it said was, yes, he did sign this legislation, but it did get some media coverage. So it's actually false to say no one's going to talk about it. I was like, it was like some newspaper in Seattle covered it. I was like, whoa, wait a second. That is some tricky tricks. It kind of, just that one example, and this probably isn't fair on my end, but that one example was like, oh, Snopes, I see the game you're playing. Like, you could have that happen too. You could have a writer who just like throws in something, gets something.
We'll make an edit probably and say that this has been updated for clarity or extra brevity or extra.
Yeah, how do you deal with that?
No,
it's inevitable.
I think anytime we make, especially a factual mistake, obviously we'll correct and offer an editor's note, explain it, and apologize. But when someone makes a mistake in the sense that, what they published was imbalanced or again, in that 250 words, we only have so much room, right? And so one 5-word phrase improperly placed can really push readers and really go against what we're trying to do. So when that does happen, diverse viewpoints or whatever the specific changes, but we also address it with the writer and talk to them, not just, hey, this was an issue, cleaned it up, explain why it was an issue and explain, here's where we found this, here's how we found this, here's why it should have been included. Our audience is great about that too, and that's why listening to audience feedback is key. We have our email inbox always open and welcoming suggestions from people, and our readers oftentimes point out very valid points about, actually, well, this could be seen this way, and therefore your article might lean a little bit this way. Again, always showing that to the writer because it's always a work in progress. Bias is also always subjective, so it means different things to different people. Obviously, person on the left, a person on the far left who reads us probably thinks we're conservative. Person on the far right who reads us probably thinks we're liberal. For us, that's a great place to be, right? And we want to maintain that, and really tackling issues of balance head on with writers is important for maintaining that, and also important for just continuing to evolve and grow our capacity and scalability when it comes to bringing balanced news to the masses.
Yeah, man. Well, where can people kind of follow everything you guys are doing? I saw that there's like a donation element of this. Like, that's the thing. People they want better news, but then they want everything free. Another tough thing with this, like ever since Napster, is like, oh, everything's free. But you get what you pay for. I asked my students, I was like, how many of you have ever paid a dime to Instagram or Mark Zuckerberg? Then how does he have so much money? How is he the 4th richest man in the world? You ever think about that? And like,
right.
They're stealing your stuff, guys. Those are his pictures, not yours anymore.
Exactly.
But where can people see what it's really nice, Henry, like when I'm doing in my classroom, I've been teaching for 17 years. Like my little classroom is 25 kids, 20 kids, 5 classes a day. It's really small. But when I'm seeing this happen on like a corporation level or like a company level, like what you guys are doing, it's like, this is amazing. That's all I want to do. As a teacher, it's like you hope for the ripple effect. You hope that one of my students goes off and does something really, really cool. And it wasn't my student that started this, but it's something that I hope my students will do. So when I came across what you guys are doing, I was like, this is exactly something that I believe will help steer us out of this. So I love it. Where can people like keep up with everything you guys are doing, support it, all of that kind of stuff? Can you just like
I
throw it all
appreciate it, Will. Thank you, Will. AllSides.com for everything. Sign up for our newsletters. Keep track of our Daily Balance newsfeed. Follow us on social media, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, at AllSides Now. And if you want to become a sustaining member, right now, the benefit of that is supporting our work and also not having ads on the website. So that's great. But also coming very soon, we're actually going to be launching premium features. So exclusive subscriber-only content from weekly newsletters to being able to ask us to investigate a claim of bias or misinformation and sort of get like an original fact check from all sides. Between those two and other things to come, we're going to have a tier of features for our paying subscribers pretty soon. So that's exciting. But for now, get acclimated with allsides.com. Follow us on social media. And you can email me too, henry@allsides.com. Just if you see anything you like or don't like, we're, like I said, always open to feedback. So
Yeah, sorry. For teachers out there too, they can contact you if that's something that they would want to bring in. Like for like a lot of schools have like school newspapers, journal. My school has like a really great journalism department. I didn't know you were working with schools, so I'm absolutely sending that to them.
Yeah, if you go to our website, we have a schools section. I believe it's just allsides.com/schools. Yes, it is. So go there and you can check out, we have individual educator membership options where you can work with us and get various perks for your classroom when it comes to balanced things, but also just resources there and links to our other great partners who are doing great stuff with schools.
Henry Brechter, thank you so much, man. This is so like cylinder radio. You know where cylinder radio comes from? The idea of the cylinder, right?
Yeah, of course.
Like that meme I saw one time, I was like, ooh, that'd be a cool like tattoo. And I was like, no, I'm gonna get a tattoo of that. But
I'm not gonna get a tattoo. I'm gonna start a podcast.
It's way better.
That works. I appreciate it, Will, and we'd love to come on again and just chop it up about more of these issues. There's always stuff to talk about. So I hope your readers enjoy this. I appreciate you having me on. I think we had a great discussion.
Will do. Absolutely, man. All right, take care.
If you enjoy these kinds of complex conversations and want to try to apply them in your own life, check out my free download, Debate to Dialogue, a guide on having productive conversations on religion and politics. It's available at www.cylinderradio.com/debate to dialogue.